Hi, I'm Adam Milewski. I'm an associate professor here in Geology, the Department of Geology at the University of Georgia. My specialty is hydrogeology in particular, so I study water resources in arid environments. So I primarily work in the deserts of the world, so the Middle East, North Africa region, Australia, southwestern part of the United States. Because water resources are an incredibly important topic, not only, of course, just for sustaining life, but also thinking about ecosystem services. And, for me, I'm a remote sensing and GIS scientist. So I'm the director of the Water Resources and Remote Sensing Lab here at the University of Georgia. And that's because our research combines both field-based data that we would do traditionally in hydrogeology with numerical models, and then lastly, particularly because of scale and the validity and advantages that remote sensing and GIS has, we have a big component for that. So that's in part why I also teach these courses here at UGA. And so in this particular case, GIS is pivotal to what we do. GIS allows us to look at geospatial relationships for a lot of these processes that are taking place over both spatial and temporal domains. And so what that means is we are seeing a lot of factors that might contribute towards groundwater recharge, or how water resources are being replenished or diminished over larger or smaller time scales and spatial scales. And so what we need to do, and what we have done in my research group, is to actually take a look at multiple different data sets. So these might be the geology of a particular area, soils, land use, precipitation, maybe even some information on governance and some other things. And then we put these into, of course, a GIS database to answer some of these questions. And we use a lot of techniques, right? GIS, as many of you are probably aware, even 15, 20 years ago, more so was about looking at just these spatial relationships, but it's building and building. And so now what we even do advanced functions. We do a lot of model builders to run automated techniques. We run a lot of neural networks and or hydrologic models using SWOT, which is a model in GIS, to answer some of these advanced questions that we're looking for. To give you some examples of some of these things, the projects that I have, I'm currently funded by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service on what we call a water resource inventory and assessment project. And so what that entails is taking all the large geodatabases that exist from multiple government agencies across the United States and trying to have them speak one common language, both in terms of file formats and or spot size and georeferencing. And so this involves entirely a GIS framework. And so what we do is call and pull all these different data sets, do all the things that we need to do within GIS to put all of this onto one consistent framework that allows all these different agencies, and the Department of Interior in this case, to actually answer questions related to threats and needs or assessments at national wildlife refuges in the United States. And so we've been doing this for about 4 years now. We've been looking at around 50 national wildlife refuges in the Southeast and building these GIS databases that also get handed off to refuge managers for future action. That's one of the advantages, of course, of GIS is it's becoming so ubiquitous that people are using it more and more and relying on these large stores of information, and it gets transfer of knowledge to other people. So in this case, we building some of these databases, and they're being passed on to refuge managers to collect additional data into the future and use them. Some of the other techniques, a little bit more fundamental research that I do is again in the Middle East, North Africa region. We're using GIS and even more so satellite-based remote sensing to answer questions about how and where the water is changing over larger time scales. You may or may not be familiar, but there are several satellites now, numerous, well over 10 satellites that are orbiting planet Earth to look at various water cycle components. In fact, every water cycle process or component or reservoir within the hydrologic cycle is observable via satellite at this point. And so we primarily will use, again, very large volumes of data. We're talking, upwards of 100 terabytes, looking at either visible near infrared data to have an idea about, are there land use, land classification changes? Are there areas of vegetation or vegetation health? Are there areas of water ponding, which has gravity-driven flow for hydrogeologists? And then we take it a little bit further, estimating stream discharge, taking even further and using a satellite called GRACE to look at groundwater storage or total water storage changes. And so we've been able to actually quantify how much recharge is taking place in some of these remote deserts around the world, and better understand these processes that govern them. So for example, what are some of the contributing factors to something we call transmission losses, which is how streams lose water to the subsurface and ultimately recharge aquifers that people could sustain localized populations. We also look at inland freshwater lenses. So inland freshwater lenses is this concept that we have freshwater accumulations in the subsurface that are accumulating on top of otherwise saline areas of water. And again, we need to look at some of these contributing factors and controlling factors. So this again involves putting in all these different data sets to get a better understanding of the hydrogeology of an area. And these are projects that are funded by the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the Smithsonian Institution up in DC. And so ultimately, to conclude, my group uses, remote sensing, GIS, UAVs as well. We have a whole suite of UAVs to get finer resolution data sets to better understand geospatial relationships related to water resources on a localized but also on a global scale.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
I don't know how long that was.